Welcome to another tutorial video of KeyStage. So in this tutorial I'm going to talk about MIDI aliases, input and output aliases. So MIDI aliases are basically placeholders for actual MIDI connections, virtual or actual connections, but they also contain lots of additional information and routing options. And specifically with this new version 1.5, MIDI aliases have many more functionalities, like translating signals, routing, or combining different signals from different MIDI ports. So what are the uses of MIDI aliases? So apart from using different names for MIDI ports, MIDI aliases play an important role of changing certain functionalities of synth apps or MIDI controllers. One of the biggest challenges of using KeyStage with multiple synth apps or MIDI controllers is that almost every synth app has a different behavior when it comes to processing MIDI messages. The way they respond to MIDI messages, instrument messages, or parameter messages are usually different in different synth apps. And there are tiny differences which might cause problems when using them in a live setup. So these MIDI aliases have specific options which allows you to adapt KeyStage to be able to work with those synth apps. So let's start with input aliases. Okay, now we access MIDI aliases from preferences MIDI connections. So the first part is for input aliases and the second part is for output aliases. Now, this is a freshly installed KeyStage, except I installed some instrument presets for demonstrational purposes. But if I click this list of MIDI aliases, I can see that I already have 6 MIDI aliases automatically created, and these are the ones that are created for actual MIDI inputs, and these actually cannot be deleted. When I create a track here, the lists that I see here is exactly the same list. So what I'm actually choosing here in this list are MIDI aliases, not just connections, but MIDI aliases with all the additional information. But now I'm going to create a new one. Let's name it my main keyboard. So this is a new editor window for input aliases with 1.5. Here are the list of actual inputs. So I can add more inputs or I can delete them. And for each input I have a bunch of filtering and translation options. But here I can choose the actual input here. So here's my North keyboard. And now if I go to the track and look at the list, now I have this additional main keyboard which receives signals from Node itself. So for the output, let's choose Jordantron with channel 2. Okay, and let's create another track with again my main keyboard and choose another synthesizer. Let's say Sunriser. So I have 2 tracks with the same MIDI input alias. Now suppose that I have to switch my keyboards and use another keyboard with my setup with all the songs. So normally what you need to do here is you have to choose the new input for each track in each song. But with MIDI input aliases you don't need to do that. You simply create a new input, and here is another keyboard that is connected, which is launch key. So now, as soon as I activated launch key, you can see that it sends signals to both tracks. And if I disconnect my North keyboard here, you can see that the North keyboard now shows in red text, which means that it's not connected. The input alias still knows that whenever a North keyboard is connected, it will start receiving signals from there. But right now it's not connected. But launch key is connected, so I can still get signals from here. But if I connect back North, all the tracks with my main keyboard will start receiving signals from North. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate these filtering options and these custom translators by splitting my North keyboard into 2 MIDI aliases. So my North keyboard has 2 pedals, one expression pedal and one switch pedal. I want to create different MIDI input aliases for the expression pedal and for the switch pedal. So let's create another input alias, and this is going to be expression pedal, exp pedal. So the input will still be North. And what I want to do is I'm going to filter out all the signals except the expression pedal signal. and I want to route that expression pedal to volume. So let's first add a custom translator. So expression pedal sends control change number 11, and my output will be volume. So the expression pedal is now converted to volume, but this alliance also gets signals from all other control change parameters and also note signals. I don't want that. So I can filter notes here, and I can filter everything. But here what it says, filtered signal types for non-translated messages. So in fact, any translated message here on these custom translators are not affected by these filters. So even if I also filter all the control change signals, this translator will still work, and the incoming control change number 11 will be converted to volume and will be routed to the expression pedal MIDI Alias, and will not be affected by these filters. So that's why it says untranslated messages. That's important. So input channels will be all channels, it doesn't matter, and the output channel will be the same as the incoming channel. Okay, but the problem is I don't want that expression pedal signal on my Node keyboards, sorry, on my main keyboard. So what I need to do is I need to create another translator and block this control change 11 on my main keyboard. So let's try it. So suppose I add this expression pedal to Jordan-Tron, but I don't add it to the Sunriser. So let's create two parts here. The notes are mapped to both Jordan-Tron and Sunriser, but the expression pedal only controls Jordan-Tron and controls the volume. And basically do the same thing with the switch pedal. Now let's go into the output alias for Sunriser. Now just like in input aliases, the output aliases that are created automatically cannot be deleted, and their actual outputs cannot be changed. But unlike input aliases, output aliases can have only one actual output, one MIDI output connected. So the next option here is the instruments. I've already gone through this in the second tutorial video. So for every alias you can assign an instrument preset. But here you can also access the database for suggestions, for instrument preset suggestions for your output alias. But I already downloaded one, so I don't need that. So this button is new. So now you can add custom translators just like in input aliases here. And you can change the output channel of your output alias. I'm gonna skip these two options because I don't want to spend more time on them. Here we can change the default channels and default color of your output alias. So for example, if I choose like 6 and 7 as my output and change the default to blue, whenever I create a track and choose Sunriser, it automatically becomes blue, and its output channels are automatically becomes 6 and 7. So these options has to do with instrument messages, which means program change and bank select messages, and when they should be sent, on what conditions they should be sent. So I'll start with this option, the first option. So it says send only when the instrument is changed. So what does that mean? Now suppose that I create a part and choose an instrument here, let's say signature lead. And I copied this part to another section. Now both parts have the same instrument, the same program change number, and the same bank select messages. And normally when I select a section, the instrument message is automatically sent. But KeyStage keeps track of the instrument for each track, and when this section is activated, send only instrument messages when it's changed. It doesn't change the instrument message if it's the same instrument. So even if I select these sections, no instrument messages are sent to Sunriser. But if I create another track here, a part here, and select another instrument, this time the instrument message is sent. You can actually understand it because Sunriser cuts the sound when it changes the instrument. So this is pretty convenient for Sunriser because when the same instrument is selected on both parts, you don't want to cut the sound. Only when you need to change the instrument, the sound cuts and the new instrument is loaded on Sunriser. But for example, for Jordantron, so Jordantron is another synthesizer, a sampler, has a different behavior in terms of changing instruments. So for example, when I choose an instrument here, and let's choose the output alias for Jordantron, and let's select always send instrument messages. Now even if I have the same instrument message sent to Jordantron, Jordantron is smart enough to know that it's the current instrument selected and doesn't cut the sound, doesn't change the instrument. Now going back to Sunriser, I want to show you this third option. This is the option that I almost always use in almost all instruments or in all apps. So send when the instrument is changed or when the active part or section is reselected. So what do you mean by the active part? It's basically the part, the section that is highlighted with this vertical strip. So for example, so it's a signature lead. When I change the section, the instrument message is not sent because it's the same instrument. But when I tap on the same section, the instrument message is sent again. This is especially useful when you want to adjust your instruments and reset its parameters. So for example, I have this part and I change the attack time on this part, and when I activate this part, the instrument message is not sent. I still have the higher attack time, but I know that the original state of the instrument has 0 attack time. So when I tap it again, the instrument message is sent and the attack time is resetted. So for each synthesizer, you may choose one of these 3 options depending on how you want to use KeyStage. You know, it really depends on whether you want to use KeyStage on a progressive way, like I do, like, you know, every section corresponds to a section of a song, or I know that some people use KeyStage as a sound module, like a sound module, sound selection unit, where each section corresponds to a different sound on your keyboard. So tapping the same section sends this instrument messages or not, depending on your choice here. Alright, this last option is also quite important. And to demonstrate it, I'm going to select another synthesizer here, Galileo, and choose my Node keyboard here, or main keyboard. Oops, sorry. So Galileo also uses channel 2. Alright, let's create a part here and choose an instrument. Now, let's say I change some of the parameters here. Suppose I add some amp simulation for the sound. Now, when I select this section here, the instrument message and all the parameters are sent to Galileo. But when I play my keyboard, I can hear the original instrument. It looks like all these parameters that I changed did not apply to Galileo. And this is mainly because of the following. Whenever Galileo receives a program change and bank select message, it starts loading the corresponding instrument. And while it's loading, so it takes a certain amount of time for Galileo to load that instrument. And during this loading procedure, it doesn't accept any signal. It doesn't accept any other parameter signals. And since these messages are sent simultaneously, Galileo basically disregards these signals and then loads the instrument with in its original state. But now if I go to the output alias of Galileo, I have this option. So if I choose a number here, like let's say 40, now after 40 milliseconds, the part parameters will be sent. So let's try if this amount of time is sufficient for Galileo. doesn't look like it's sufficient, because sometimes the loading time changes. So 40 milliseconds might not be perfectly sufficient. So you may basically have to experiment with this number and choose the optimum amount of time for the part parameters to be sent to the corresponding instrument. And let me show you. If I choose a high number here, and when so just look at the MIDI in and out lights here, you can see that there is a gap between the first. So the first blink corresponds to the instrument message, and the second blink corresponds to the parameters. So in this final part, I want to actually build a technical example with the North output. Actually, this is a setup that I use for the MIDI Alias for North. Let me briefly describe the behavior of North. So North Electro has three sound engines inside, and you can actually control 2 of them simultaneously. So there is this main channel. I changed it to 16. So as I play this, as I send MIDI messages to this channel, you can hear both piano and the string sound. But you can actually control these 2 sounds separately. I assign one of them to be channel 2. So channel 2 corresponds to the first synth engine. Let me actually copy and paste. And channel 3 is the second synth engine. So people use only the first part and use North's inbuilt features like splitting and layering to control both synthesizers. But since I have KeyStage, I want to independently control these instruments. Well, it looks like I can independently control with these 2 different tracks, but there is a catch. On the main channel, all these volume changes and instrument messages can be received, but on these channels, none of them work. Basically, North does not respond to any of these messages, parameters or control change and program change messages on either channel 2 or 3. Every time I need to change the instrument, I need to create a part corresponding to channel 16, change the instrument there, then mute it, and then work on the other 2 tracks. This is something that I don't want. I really want these 2 channels, these 2 tracks to act independently, be able to change the instrument and also the parameters on these tracks independently. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into the output alias corresponding to North and go into translators. So I want to route all the program change and control change signals to channel 16. Now I add a custom translator. Now the custom translators has a couple of new options with 1.5. One of them is I can actually change any control change signal. So the input doesn't have to be a specific control change, but it can be any control change. And whenever I have any control change as the input, I have this additional option as same as input. So the same control change signal is routed to the output. Okay, so right now basically nothing changes. It basically sends the same control change, but we also have now control over channels for custom translators. So the custom translators can manipulate the channels of incoming signals. So what I want to do is I want to route these signals to channel 16. And I want to do the same thing for the program change. So I add another custom translator, choose input, program change as input and also output, and route this to channel 16. Now, all the messages coming into this channel or routed out of this track, the node signals are routed to channel 2, but all the other signals are routed to channel 16, which basically changes the instrument and its parameters. we're almost done. So you can see that we have two different instruments assigned, and now I can change the instruments, but there's a slight problem. The sustain pedal is also routed to the main, to the channel 16, which basically suspends both channel 2 and 3 simultaneously. So let me try to simulate that. Suppose I have another part here and I filter out all the pedal signals on this part. It is sustained because through this part the pedal signals are routed to the main channel, that's channel 16, and that basically suspends both the synthesizers. So what I need to do is so these apply to all control change signals, but pedal is control change 64. I don't want to route it to channel 16, but I want to route it to the actual channel for each instrument. All right, so to do that, we have to do some work. I'm going to create a custom translator with this pedal signal 64, and the outputs will also be 64. And I'm gonna specify from which track it comes, this pedal signal comes. So this custom translator only applies to pedal signals coming from channel 2. So if it's on this channel, this translator, output signal, so right now I want to route it to something like 6. And I want to make sure that this control change, this pedal signal coming out on channel 6 is not translated to 16 by this translator. So I'm going to change the input channels of this translator to 2 and 3. So what happens is when I press my pedal signal on channel 2, it goes into this translator. This translator changes into output channel 6. And now this translator doesn't do anything to that signal, because it only changes signals from 2 to 3. And after I pass this translator, I have to add another one, change that 6 back to 2. So I'm also choosing channel 64, control change 64, route it to 64, and this time it's gonna convert 6 to 2. So this is a long list of translators which basically routes the channel. So this is kind of a trick that allows me to skip this translator for pedal signals. It changes the channel 2 to 6 and then back to 2 on this translator. So basically skips this part for any other translators. And I have to do the same thing for channel 3. So for example, let me quickly do that. And this time I'm going to change 3 to, let's say, 7. And at the end, I need to change it back to 3. So now, my pedal signal suspends this track. Let's solo this. But when I select the section, the pedal only suspends this because the pedal signals are filtered on here.